Thank you. A very warm welcome to this high-level panel discussion on growing agriculture, growing jobs, the private sector on the spot. My name is Veronica Rubio, and I honor to be the moderator of this very fascinating panel, also because I am accompanied by a very distinguished panel that I will introduce you very shortly. I would like to begin by thanking the organizations that have made this possible and the representatives that I believe are among the public. So please join me in a warm applause to thank very truly COLCP, the European Bank, the European Investment Bank, a Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. Thank you very much for all the work and efforts to make this panel possible. Thank you. I would like also to introduce my co-moderator and panelist, Kim Sawyer. Thank you. And I would like to start the panel by introducing our keynote speaker. Unfortunately, His Excellency Ignatius Gomez, Secretary General of the ACP Group of States, cannot be present today, but I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Niasu, who will speak on his behalf. Thank you. Please welcome Mr. Niasu. He will make the keynote speak in French, so please use your device to follow the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Indeed, the Secretary General of the ACP Group, who had intended, really wanted to be here, is unable to do so, because today we are holding the 40th anniversary of the ACP, as you probably know, and it so happens that there was such a high level of participation. Representatives of parliaments and government arrived in Brussels today, presidents of institutions from our regions, so we had to stay at the ACP house to welcome them. I hope I will be able to honor the choices which have been made, to give you the introductory speech to this panel. This covers, obviously, agriculture and opportunities for job creation, decent jobs indeed, in rural areas. Now, the message that the ACP Group wants to get across is basically to say that our intention is to continue the activities we're already engaged in, to have a sustainable, resilient and creative economy. As far as we're concerned in agriculture, the general hope of the population and the concerns of the population are based around that. But we need to look at how we can ensure that we have a quantitative discussion and that we have help given to small farmers and also a contribution to the benefit of the final consumers. We need to ensure that all the actors in the chain find their place. Now, in our countries, many people live in rural areas, and this whole issue has become even more important. We need to know how we can integrate this majority of rural populations into the growth strategy for the country. In ACP countries in particular, I think everybody will agree that 60 to 70% of the working population are in the agri-food sector. And also in other countries, we note that there are around 500 million operators around the world in family businesses. And in our countries, 100 to 200 million people are involved in agriculture, and they are family farmers, these people. So obviously we're trying to develop trade relations, but most land is cultivated by family farmers. We need to encourage their and strengthen their capacity to grow crops for their family and also to be able to take crops to market. In most of the cases that we observe, these farms do not have sufficient access to tools which will help them increase their yields. Production is carried out without actually knowing what the market needs. And we think that the creative capacity for creating wealth and jobs, that can be unlocked by making that connection. If we manage to connect production to the markets, and if we can ensure that when you're producing and growing food, you know you're going to be able to sell it, I think we at the ACP think that we will be able to unlock momentum and create significant amounts of jobs. In general, households are structured that there are gender differences and age differences, and in most of our countries, in rural family farms, the average age of the head of the household is around 55 or around 60. And when you know what the life expectancy is in our countries, we know that 55, you're actually over the expected the age of life, average life expectancy. So what we want to do is trying to find mechanisms which allow us to unlock this momentum, to ensure that markets are connected to production, and all the intermediate businesses such as transport and processing, where jobs are more attractive because they're less onerous, they're less difficult jobs for women and young girls. So we could start a momentum where we have sufficient amount of decent jobs for this target population. The questions of gender, that's an important one, but it has to be a cross-cutting policy. We want to create decent jobs where women can be integrated into the labour market and be integrated into part of this greater connection between production and the markets. Now, if we think in terms of public policy, the ACP group has approved a range of policies. In these policies, around 60% of the 60-70% of the action we'll be taking will be connected to developing agriculture. That doesn't mean that all the resources we deploy with our European partners are going to be in that proportion, because we want to look outside our traditional partnerships. But that means that gives you an idea of the role that we're attributing to agriculture in our economy. We want to create jobs in rural areas. We also need to connect that to regional activities. We need to ensure that we have action at the grassroots level, but also at the regional level and of regional trade associations. So regional chambers of commerce who can perhaps supply the levers that we need. So the clear message that we want to put across today is that we want to create activity in the agricultural world, and that means not just getting support from the private sector. We need to help the private sector connect farming to the market. Now, I've been working for the ACP for some time, but I also went away to set up my own business in the agri-food sector. I gave up my comfortable job as a civil servant. And he's saying, are you going to stop doing development now that you're not a civil servant? And it was difficult for me to explain that development is something I'm doing now that I'm working in the private sector. I'm creating jobs and I'm setting up a company. So that's the kind of approach we need to take. That's the message we want to get across to launch the debate this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. We have some questions for you in the panel, in the public. I'm going to see if they appear in the screen. The question is, it is possible to boost decent job creation in agriculture. And you have some voting device with you. And please press 1 if you think the answer is yes. Yes, it is possible. Press 2 if you think the answer is no, it is not possible. And please press 3 if you think you don't know. At the end of the panel, we will make again the question and see if the results are similar or not. I give some. You are already there. It's you. Okay, so I see that my co-moderator has already joined me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is good news. We have a lot of positive thinking in the room. 71%. Fantastic. So we will see.
Okay, so thank you. Very interesting result there. It'd be interesting to see how that set of results might change at the end of today's session, because we're going to pose the same question again. Thank you, Veronica. So we've started this session with an exciting speech that you all just heard from Mr. Niyasunu. And I think what I would like to do now is really set the scene for what we consider to be a very, very possibly the most important topic on the planet today. So agriculture is undoubtedly the source of food. I don't think anyone would argue with that. It's also a source of market revenues and a source of employment for millions of workers worldwide. Therefore, promoting agriculture is vital for society. The creation of jobs, however, in rural areas must be inclusive, it must be sustainable and respectful to humankind, so there must be dignity. It must also take into account respect for the environment. So with that said, I'd like to pose 2 key questions. The first one is, how can the private sector, international or national, lead to the creation of decent jobs in the agriculture sector in a way that contributes to reducing poverty, feeding the world, and of course ensuring that that there are better lives for workers and smallholders alike. And we've heard about the role that smallholders play in such an important aspect of humanity. So how can the private sector, international and national, lead in the creation of decent jobs in the agriculture sector in a way that contributes to reduce poverty, feed the world, and of course create better lives for workers and smallholders alike? The second question I'd like to pose is, what is the role that the private sector can or must play to be a vector of prosperity? So it's clear that the private sector has an important role to play. And I think sometimes it's important to enable the private sector and let them see that. But the question is, what role can they play? What role must they play? And we're hoping to elicit some of these answers out of our very interactive discussion we're going to have today. Now, some of you may be aware that there was a session yesterday, a PLAB session, where we had a breakout. And the session yesterday was titled Agriculture Matters for Decent Jobs. And a whole group of us brainstormed on the different roles and responsibilities for the public sector, for the private sector, and for civil society. So we were trying to understand what roles and responsibilities the public sector has or had, what roles they should have, what responsibilities they should have, what role the private sector has in terms of its own roles and responsibility, and where does civil society play into the whole equation. And we brainstormed this yesterday and came out with some very interesting and insightful outcomes, which we'd like to share with you today. And I'm going to hand over to Veronica to share with you some of the outcomes from this most interesting session that we had yesterday. And I can see a few faces here who contributed to that.
Absolutely.
Veronica.
Thank you. Yeah, so if you remember yesterday, there were some consensus amount what would be the role, for example, for public sector, mainly at the national level is truth, but also possibly at the international level. And one of the leading role the groups identified for public sector was first, define the rules, but also monitor their correct application and enforce the law. That was one of the major leading roles for the public sector. The other one was enable investment and promote incentives towards decent job creation. Also, ensure good education and vocational training that allow people not only being productive at work, but also being vigilant and active citizens. I think that was very, very much emphasized the importance of education. And fourth, ensure social protection. There was also consensus for civil society's role, which role could civil society play. And I really like it, the idea of civil society being a sort of living conscious that will ensure both public and private sector to talk and work together towards prosperous societies where people can have better lives. Furthermore, the civil society should, and also like it very much, this emphasis on push for transparency and raise awareness about the needs for decent jobs. And last but not least, with regard to the private sector, which is on the spot today, the group concluded that the private sector should be responsible for promoting innovation, particularly towards ecological techniques and promoting smart agriculture, sharing market information that allows balance the power in the supply chain, invest in training for workers, such as occupational health and safety, but also open dialogue within managers and workers, as well as, for example, access to grievance mechanisms, and also moving from informal to formal employment, that we know informal employment is really happening in many, many of the countries we work with. We left, actually, we didn't have the time to go through all the topics, and we left some open questions, such as land tenure or protection of the young workers or protection of the youth. Also, the gender issue was touched, but not as intensively as we would like to. And I think that's why it's very important that we open the panel. And I would like you to welcome very warmly the panelists that we have today. Please join me with a warm applause to invite Céline Chevalier to the stage. She is Director of Advocacy in Campaigning at Oxfam International. Thank you. Our second panelist is Victor Rodriguez, future leader from Dominican Republic. Please. Our third panelist is Thomas Silverhorn, Parliamentary State Secretary for the Federal Ministry for Economy, Cooperation and Development in Germany. And last but not least, we count with the great support from Ver Surcu, Executive Director of Durabilis. Thank you. Akin, I forgot. Will you join us?
With all pleasure. I'll get up.
Wait a second. Is it working now? Yeah? Fantastic. So this is the idea. The idea will be that I will make some questions to you, but also making sure that we interact as much as possible with this fantastic public, and we interact and get some good conclusions out of the panel. Is that okay with you? Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for being here, by the way. My first question will be for Céline. Céline, she is an experienced researcher, advocate, negotiator, and manager in the area of development. She also had a solid experience in trade and primary commodities, as well as working with smallholders. And my question for you will be, from your perspective, what are the challenges in creating decent jobs in the agriculture sector?
Many challenges, obviously, and you have referred to some of them. But maybe I wanted to start with saying that I feel the challenges are changing very much. You will remember in 2008 when there was a sudden rise in food prices. I think we are seeing a very different relationship between the food system and energy, and the nexus of food and energy, as we know, is going to be quite critical for the sustainability of the agricultural system, both the rise of biofuels, but also the increasing volatility of food prices that we're seeing. We also know that because of climate change, we will have decreasing yields. We are expecting, for instance, in some maize and wheat, it's already decreasing. We're expecting to see more of that. At the same time, the amount of arable land per head is decreasing. And then also, there's an increasing issue with water scarcity. So I think the first thing I wanted to say is if we use the old solutions, we're not going to be able to address the new challenges that we're facing, especially because so many young people, and I'm sure that will be said more, do not want to stay in rural areas, that we're going to see an enormous urbanization in every country. So the role of agriculture in development is rapidly changing. So that's the first challenge, is to design solutions for the future, certainly not for the past, but not even for the present. The second challenge, in my view, is how do we create a living income for small producers? At the end of the day, small producers still produce 80% of the value of the food in the world. And we see too many places where, they don't make a living income. And if you look at the challenge that climate change will place to them, what does that mean? I mean, if people don't make a living income, they're not going to stay in rural areas. They'd rather go and become poor people in cities than stay in rural areas and not make a living. The second element is, of course, how do you make jobs decent? Obviously, agriculture does provide a lot of jobs, but I don't think we've seen enough progress in making those jobs decent. I'll just have one example. We work in East Morocco with communities that are involved in strawberry picking. The people who recruit and pay the workers are actually handlers, gang masters, if you want to call them. And women, and I know I'll speak about women a bit more afterwards, are at risk of sexual abuse on a daily basis. So I think it's great to see that the terms of the debate have changed, and there's no questioning of the issue of decent jobs, but the progress is very, very slow. And so we need again to think about what would be new solutions that can be brought rapidly at scale, and that's why the private sector alongside the government is so important.
Thank you, Céline. I actually wonder if we have the same understanding on what decent jobs are, really, because one could argue, and I'm going to be a bit confronted here maybe, that decent job is just a discussion that is a luxury discussion, and particularly in poor areas where the first priority is to fight poverty, and therefore, if you have a job, it's good enough if you already have one. How do you feel about it, Akin? What is your...
Thank you very much, Veronica. I think it's a very good question. And coming from a a country where the unemployment levels are extremely high, particularly youth unemployment, an import-dependent country that is Nigeria, a quarter of the population of Africa. It is a burning question, and a question that we get asked every day. So, what is a job? How important is it to have a job? What is a decent job? How do we define a decent job? A decent job in Nigeria today is a job that puts cash in your pocket every day. Now, how sustainable is that, and what degradation, what loss of dignity, what level of what standard of living that would earn the individual who is coming from really an extremely poor position to find, oftentimes in a rural area where they're working in agriculture, they find themselves in the city chasing cars, trying to sell sort of Chinese goods to motorists. To be able to actually put their hands on a little bit of cash, which they believe helps them to make daily decisions about what they can do or not do, what they can eat or not eat, where they can go or not go. It's a real challenge, because in the long term, these so-called jobs may not be sustainable in the same sort of way that an organized, well-structured agricultural, if I could use the word, career would be able to provide for these people in the long term. So we're very busy trying to understand how important it is, first of all, to keep people busy. And you will all be aware of the insurgency in the northern parts of Nigeria, where most of the activities and most of the recruitment comes from people who really have nothing to do day after day after day after day. So it becomes very easy to convince them to take a gun and go and carry out various levels of atrocities. So the first issue is people need to be kept busy. In the environment where there's very little manufacturing going on, there are very few factories, there are power challenges, agriculture does offer a major respite. So that's the first challenge. The second is, how do you then begin to structure and create specialization, increase access to markets, either in the urban areas, so that actually the increased access to markets, the increased opportunity to specialize either in particular crops or in particular, however minimal levels of the value chain, begin to create some sort of sustainable roadmap to giving people a real opportunity to think about a career. Here we are, we're talking about jobs, but actually in the long term, it is possible to turn jobs into careers, but you need to start with jobs. And the jobs that people go to the cities to find, yes, will put some cash in their pocket, and to them they see it as jobs, but in the long term, it's totally unsustainable and does lead to exploitation and does lead to a certain amount of environmental degradation, which I can expand on later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I am wearing two hats today, and so I'm a panelist and I'm also a moderator. So what I'm going to do is really lead on the next question, and the question I'm going to ask is going to be addressed to Mr. Thomas Silberhorn, who was appointed Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister of Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany in 2014. The focus of his work is on core development and issues for the future, human rights, good governance, education, and poverty reduction. So, Mr. Silberhorn, what I'd like to ask you is around the fact that Germany has been supporting triangular cooperation, the triangular cooperation model since the 1980s. How does this cooperation model work? Could you sort of enlighten us and educate us on this? Could it help when creating decent jobs? And also, particularly in rural areas, and do you have any success stories, given the length of time that this has been happening, that you could share with us today? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I very much share the assessment you made on rural development, because I think urbanization is not due to the attractiveness of urban areas to the young generation. it's more due to the lack of perspectives in the rural areas. And therefore, we have to ask the question, why so many young people leave their home areas, and what are our concepts for living perspectives in rural areas, in fast-growing societies, and at the same time a disastrous degradation of soil. So less soil can be used for feeding a fast-growing population. In the end, this will need an increase in productivity. But increase in productivity does not only mean producing more food. It applies to the entire value chain, and it does not only apply to primary production. It has to include the processing as well. And this shows that it's also a question of participation. We exclude many farmers, many societies from the added value that can be generated in processing of goods because they are restricted to primary production only. So we need a holistic approach on this issue of agricultural policy and rural development of rural areas. The instrument you mentioned of triangular cooperation is a specific format of development policy that we do as a donor country with a developing partner, and which applies to a third country as developing partner. So we support a developing country in implementing its development policy with a third partner. In this, we strengthen South-South cooperation. Our developing partner benefits from our experience in development policy, from our knowledge in developing processes, in managing development policy. And the third partner, where the projects are implemented, is also benefiting from the experience that the first developing partner has in implementing projects in its own country, and of course in cooperating with us. So triangular cooperation is an instrument to facilitate the implementation of development projects. And to make it concrete on several examples, we cooperate, for example, with Chile and the Dominican Republic in implementing youth employment measures, promoting training measures in the Dominican Republic, implemented through Chile and accompanied, supported by us, by our means of expertise, of financial resources, and of methodology knowledge. A second example would be our cooperation with Malaysia and Timor-Leste in the fisheries sector. We support fisheries cooperatives in Timor-Leste. And here again, the main cooperation is done between Malaysia and Timor-Leste, a South-South cooperation, but supported by German development cooperation. And since this is in the fisheries sector, we have a concrete example for rural development and new perspectives in the agricultural sector.
Just a very quick follow-up to that. That's very interesting and very enlightening. In terms of specific successes from those two examples, are there any key metrics you can share with us about what has made those programs successful? So in terms of job creation, have you seen an increase in that area, just as outcomes from those triangular projects you just described?
Just have a look at my notes. We have a concrete project in Madagascar where we can count the effect. It's sometimes a challenge to measure the concrete impact of projects, but in this cooperation we have with Madagascar to to support the flavor and fragrance producers. We created 4,000 new jobs for 4,000 vanilla farmers and their families in cooperating in this sector, in this country. Of course, it's sometimes difficult to come to such concrete figures, but we can make a difference by cooperating in this triangular instrument, because this is an opportunity to strengthen capacities in two developing countries, and this stresses this emerging economies potential, and I think this is of growing importance in development policy. So our developing partners in triangular cooperation are usually emerging economies that used to be recipient countries and now become more and more donor countries on their own. They create their own development agencies. They have an own approach and claim to integrate development policy in their external relations. They create development policy to address their own neighborhood. And for this, of course, they are interested in our expertise and knowledge on building these capacities. And at the same time, they help to strengthen institutional capacities in the third country where the joint projects are implemented.
Thank you very much. Yeah? Oh, coming here.
So thank you for that. I think that's very interesting. Thank you for what is very clear as a.
Since I'm standing up, how many in the public knows triangular cooperation, the term? Raise your hands. Ah, okay, very good. Actually, I was not aware that so many people will know this model. And how many people in the public knows what are social enterprises? Wow. We are really very, very lucky. So actually, I also know that, Bert, you are the executive director of Durables. I know you have a very important experience working in Mexico, Portugal, Guatemala, and Costa Rica, collaborating with the smallholders to support them in the social compliance progress. And I also know that Durables is not a very conventional private company, as it has social impact at the heart of the business model. Do you think this model is something that can be mainstream, or do you think it needs to stay a niche so it's still successful? Thank you.
Thank you. Just wanted to sort one thing out. I'm not the executive director, but the sustainability director of Durables. But yes, I think Durables, we call it a business with a purpose, a social impact business. And our purpose is happy food for everyone. And I think the everyone already stresses that we think it should be mainstream. It really should not be a niche issue. Businesses always actually, Durables seems to be a little bit particular because we claim we have a purpose, but I think businesses, entrepreneurs always start with an idea of there's a challenge, how can we tackle that? What can I do to solve a certain problem? And almost every business started with a purpose. Somewhere on the road, I think, business has lost this idea of having a purpose and entered into a rationale or a logic of profit maximization. And this is where the problems start. This is where probably employees, suppliers are seen more as a resource, as something to exploit, rather than somebody else for people to collaborate with, to see as partners in a business. And this is what we don't want to do. Our purpose is really to collaborate with the people and take employees, suppliers, producers as seriously as many other businesses do with their customers, for example. So for us, all these stakeholders are treated on an equal level. And this is how we want to achieve our purpose. We really believe that by collaborating more and taking our stakeholders very, very serious and taking their needs into account, the performance of the businesses on the long run will be much, much higher. On the long run, I say, because on the short term, there are still trade-offs that we really feel. But we're really convinced that having motivated and committed people, because we really work with them, we address their needs, makes us much stronger to deal with threats and opportunities in the long run. There is a movement in the United States which is called conscious capitalism, which we are very much fond of. We follow that very closely. And there is a professor there, he's called Raj Sisodia, who wrote a book, Firms of Endearment, where he really proves that businesses who apply this model are, in the long run, much more performant financially as well. So this has really been proven. Of course, you need to find investors who want to share that story, who want to be part of such a story, which is a little bit more difficult today. So in that sense, you might call it still a niche, an investment niche then. But I think it's only growing. It's going to become much bigger in the future. Well, this is regarding the particularity of Durabilis. But what I see in Durabilis, in one of our business units, which is dedicated to export, is that decent jobs and sustainability is mainstreamed already. It's being mainstreamed very, very fast. A few years ago, we had to try to convince our customers of our approach to sustainability, to decent jobs. We had to explain what certification meant. Today, they are demanding from us to be certified. There's no other option. Many of our competitors had to do the same thing, to include decent job sustainability certification in their business. And we think this is a very good evolution. There's a much more emphasis on food safety. It started with food safety for the customers. Now it's social compliance. In the future, it's going to be environmental care. And of course, if you want to achieve this certification, there's a lot more need for collaboration throughout the chain, the entire chain. And there's a lot more transparency needed. So all this collaboration, this evolution, according to me, is unavoidable. And I'm very much convinced that in the near future, this will be mainstream and not a niche. And then a third part of my answer is, of course, local businesses. We also have business units which function locally, have a local market in Senegal and Burkina Faso. We don't, of course, see that evolution that much. The demand of certification comes from importers, retailers here in the north. And there, I think we are still in this niche situation. For example, our rice in Senegal is long grain rice being sold in a higher GAM market. And with that upside, we are able to pay our farmers good prices. But that's a small group, and we're not able yet to make that a large business. So it's something we hope to grow in the future.
Very good news.
Thanks.
Thank you. I was very interested in the concept of conscious capitalism, I think you said. Just out of interest, how many of us in the audience are aware of this concept of conscious capitalism? Okay, very few. So perhaps we can just ask that you just share with us very quickly what that's about, because it's clearly impacting what you're doing. Thank you.
Conscious capitalism is a movement which says that business, in essence, is a good thing. It's based on voluntary transactions. You would expect that it could almost do no harm, because if you don't agree with the transaction, you just don't participate. It's totally different than what governments do, for example. So what I say is just we have to make revival of business, and make sure that business is not just a way of maximizing profit, but of creating social goods, of using businesses as vehicles for societal improvement. And they do that by doing, it's described in 4 tenets. First of all, making your purpose explicit, and not maximizing profit for shareholders, using that as a purpose, but really looking what societal issue are you addressing as a business. And then there's a lot of emphasis on stakeholder involvement, addressing the needs of the stakeholders. There's a lot of emphasis on company culture. How do you create a company culture in which employees really feel engaged and committed to that purpose? So there's a lot of emphasis on taking care for each other so that your people takes care of your stakeholders. In few words, that's what conscious capitalism is about.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm going to just move across now and bring Victor into the conversation. Victor is an industrial engineer, a very youthful industrial engineer who works as an evaluator for the National Quality Award to the private sector. Victor, I have a question for you. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Victor is going to be addressing us in Spanish, so please be prepared if you don't understand Spanish with your translation equipment. So lack of opportunities, Victor, in rural areas usually rebounds in forced migration of young people to the cities. This phenomenon clearly negatively impacts society from many different angles. There's obviously greater vulnerability for exploitation as people leave the safety of their families and their homes and go into the big cities. There's also the potential for talent and leadership decimation in the rural areas. Can the creation of decent jobs stop this phenomenon, do you think, Victor? And what do you think can be done?
Sí. Yo quiero contar un poco mi historia. Yo nací en las montañas, en República Dominicana, en un pequeño pueblo que tiene menos de 50,000 habitantes. Y mi madre me decía siempre, yo quiero que tú estudies agronomía, ingeniería agrónoma. Y yo decía, madre, no quiero estudiar ingeniería agrónoma, pero todo tiene un motivo. Yo le decía, no quiero estudiar esa carrera porque realmente la paga no era buena, no te aseguraba oportunidades de crecimiento. Yo lo veía como que quería estudiar otra cosa. Y decidí mudarme a la ciudad. En la ciudad, en Santo Domingo. Entonces, inicié la universidad en ingeniería industrial. Y le decía, cuando llamaba, mi madre se quedó viviendo en el campo. Le decía, me está yendo súper bien, me gusta lo que estoy haciendo. Y ahora, hace poco me gradué como ingeniero en ingeniería industrial. ¿Y qué pasa? Yo pienso que mi historia se relaciona mucho con el tema porque yo no quise quedarme en mi pueblo por el hecho de que había muy pocas oportunidades. Entonces, yo respondo a la pregunta de la siguiente manera. Nosotros primero debemos hacer un cambio de mentalidad, tanto de las familias como de los gobiernos. Especialmente en América Latina, los padres no quieren que sus hijos estudien temas relacionados con la agricultura, porque en mi país se ve el agricultor, o sea, se menosprecia al agricultor. Igual el gobierno no lo hace directamente, pero sí pasa de que a veces se discrimina a estas personas que trabajan en el sector y los padres prefieren a un hijo doctor, un ingeniero, un hijo abogado, y me parece que esta mentalidad realmente es un poco rara para el desarrollo sustentable. Igual pienso que los gobiernos deben fortalecer las regulaciones para crear trabajo decente e incentivar a la juventud a fortalecer sus capacidades en la producción alimentaria. Otra de las ideas que se me ocurren es que el sector privado debe crear campañas de producción de alimentos orgánicos y estos deberían ser liderados por jóvenes donde se les aseguren buena vivienda, donde se les aseguren salarios decentes y oportunidades de crecimiento profesional, porque la juventud quiere realmente crecimiento profesional al mismo tiempo quieren un salario decente. Sin embargo, pasa en muchas ciudades, los jóvenes se mudan de su pequeño pueblo o campo a la ciudad, pero cuando llegan a la ciudad se encuentran con la sorpresa de que realmente van a encontrar un trabajo donde van a ser explotados, van a encontrar un trabajo donde realmente van a ser mal pagados, y pasa constantemente que muchos regresan a su pueblo de nuevo por no tener éxito. Entonces, esto perpetúa la miseria y la depresión, lo que trae como grandes consecuencias la desmotivación para crear ideas innovadoras para solucionar problemas en nuestras comunidades. Sin embargo, no todo es malo. En mi país yo tengo una buena práctica de compartir, es que el presidente de la República todos los domingos va a las comunidades rurales. Se reúne con la juventud, se reúne con los agricultores y le dice qué ustedes necesitan para incentivar la producción de X fruta o de X vegetales, por ejemplo. Y luego que el presidente de la República tiene un conversatorio con la comunidad, él otorga un microcrédito para que esas comunidades realmente puedan incentivar y dinamizar la economía. Y he podido presenciar realmente que jóvenes se han beneficiado de esos microcréditos, y esto es una súper buena práctica que podemos compartir, no solamente en la región de América Latina y el Caribe, sino también en África y otras regiones. Otra experiencia que puedo compartir es que las universidades motivan a través de becas y le ofrecen hasta cierta mensualidad para que estudien realmente todos los temas y carreras relacionados al sector agrícola. Y esto también yo lo considero buena práctica, porque existe una realidad que a veces la juventud tampoco considera, es que cada día somos más personas en el mundo, tenemos que comer 3 veces al día. Ahora mismo está de moda que la gente quiere comer alimentos orgánicos, pero si no vinculamos a la juventud en esa toma de decisiones, que se empoderen con el tema, ¿cómo nosotros vamos a producir alimentos que realmente sean saludables para nuestro cuerpo? Entonces, eso también es un punto que nosotros debemos decir, y yo lo pienso constantemente. La gente todos los días tiene que comer, la gente todos los días tiene que beber, y eso lo produce la tierra. Entonces tenemos que también incentivar las buenas prácticas ambientales para que nosotros podamos vivir y podamos tener una vida más sana. Entonces, creo que esa es mi respuesta a la pregunta. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Victor. Muchas gracias. So before we open the floor for the questions, I see any hand of questions. I would like to invite to the stage Mr. Roberto Rodolfi, because I have seen him taking notes very carefully. And I'm sure he has a lot of good ideas to share. Thank you. Please join us. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Rodolfi. I think I'd also like to invite Mr. Nyasinu on board as well to come and join us on the panel to really liven up this debate so that we can get some real discussion going here. Thank you.
So please raise your hand. Do we see any questions? Gentlemen, could you please introduce yourself, your organization, and pose the question to the panel?
Question and comment. My name is Jethro Green, Chief Coordinator for the Caribbean Farmers Network. Just a few quick question and comment. First of all, in the rural communities, I think the mistake we have made, a lot of us have made, is that we divorce agriculture from the rural communities. Agriculture fits into the rural communities, and farmers, like anybody else, need the same health care. They need connectivity, they need roads, they need light, they need water. But what has actually happened is that the development strategy in most of the third world countries have been very focused on the urban areas. And they don't have the connectivity and things like that in rural communities. We have seen in the Caribbean where some efforts were made by government to put connectivity throughout rural communities, where actually young people refuse to go into the city and people from the city move into the rural areas. The other point I want to make is that in terms of the image of agriculture, I have a little problem with decent job. I like the fact to say that farmers are business persons. And I would venture to say that theoretically it looks as if people don't want to go into agriculture, but you ask yourself the question, why? If you do not make money, profit, You're telling me as a farmer, do environmentally friendly agriculture. What is in it for me? A private sector person, you go to them and you tell them something. They say, am I going to make a profit off of that? But we go with our romantic views to agriculture and expect them to implement things while they're making losses. That's crap. And I'm saying we need to take a hard look at the fact that the farmers are small business persons. The farmers are business persons. In the Caribbean, we have to take that proactive approach. We now promote the idea of profitable markets for our farmers with the support of our colleagues from COLAP, SCP, CTA, and FAO and other organizations, where we are promoting agriculture as a business. And we are seeing where young people are taking a different look at agriculture. In truth and in fact, as long as you could demonstrate profitability, I don't know about decent, I want to make money. I want to see my farmers drive cars. I want to see my farmers' standard of living much higher than those people who work as a school teacher or job, because they deserve it. The last point I want to make is along the value chain. The ideological position we have taken is that if you really want to seriously impact agriculture, you have to make sure that farmers get more of the value chain. And this is not no novel idea. If you look at Ocean Spray Cranberry Juice, when they promote, they say, we're not only the farmers, we are the owners of the whole business. But they are on the farm working, but they have strategic partnership along the chain that does it. And we are afraid to understand that our farmers in the third world countries are being exploited because they make so little money. They are like slaves on the farm, that their children would not go into agriculture because they're not making a profit. Where we have seen in the Caribbean, where we have readdressed that, where we start to see more money go at the farm level, we have seen young people going into agriculture, even school teachers participating in agriculture. So I'm saying, let's get off of this romantic, theoretical cloud and get to the hardcore reality of what is needed. And that's why we are pushing our partners, COLAP, SCP, FAO and things. Don't talk, come and let us practically implement on the ground. Let's take what is worked and scale it up. And we are seeing that there are good examples of things that are working. And let's scale up those.
Thank you very much. And thank you. Who would like to comment from the panel? Any comments? Thank you.
Is right. Is right. I would suggest that we are less shy and we give him a very big round of applause. Is right, but being right is not enough, my good friend. We have to provide concrete, working, functional initiatives to do what is not happening. Why the private sector is not investing the 75, 80 billion private investments in agriculture that are needed in developing countries? Why? I start my conclusion, Madame la Modératrice, Monsieur le Modérateur. We heard here a very touching move to the private sector by our Deputy SecGen. And he was asked, are you quitting development? He answered, I'm starting it. Not only my personal development, but also of those that will benefit of the traction that I can generate. Nexus Food Energy. 80% of the value of the food from small order. 80% of the value of the food from small orders. Well, that is astonishing. That is a big thing that we should all reflect. So how can it be that a big portion of these smallholders can get a decent living out of it if 80% of the value they produce? How can it be? I have a small answer to propose. I think you have said here, you, the panelists, I want to summarize. We have to create a much more decent definition of the word farming. Farming is not feeding. Farming is getting a salary, is getting a living to send your children to university at Harvard. Can we agree on that? Yes. That is farming. So if we move this this paradigm, farming is not feeding your family. Well, you are a future leader. Later you will tell me how can you be sure to be a leader. But That is fantastic. We need to nobilitate the world of farming so that young people will decide to do farming as a profession. As you have decided to do whatever, I am decided to do something and then I did something else, but that's another story. The essence is willingness, the determination of human being to achieve something. If we don't move out from this paradigm, we go nowhere. But in that, the discussion of today is therefore how to make agriculture a real and a serious business for those that decide to do. I agree, we have to escape from this romantic assumption. You know, in development, me and my colleagues, we have been working for the last 40 years in the romantic assumption that rural development will make the trick. And we have seen urbanization going up and up and up and up. The World Bank last year came up with a study that without 60% of urbanization, you can't have sustainable GDP growth. What they are telling us, that, you know, let's get out of the countryside, as the minister said. Let's get out. I was ambassador in Kampala, and people were selling their small piece of land to buy a boda-boda. You know what is a boda-boda? It's a motorbike. And they're going to Kampala and to run the motorbike, and after 1 year they were broke. Right? No land, no money, nothing. But the glamour of going and doing something where things happen is stronger than the lack of perspectives you have. This in jobs, create careers, very good definition. If I can build a career out of my willingness to be farmer, to do farming, that is a big shift. Specialization, environmental degradation, no perspective in rural areas. We need to mobilize expertise, the German example, expertise, financial resources, but I would add also passion. If you wouldn't be passionate, if the colleagues of GIZ wouldn't be passionate of what they do, wherever they do it, they won't be successful. I totally sympathize with the human aspect of this. But now let's come to the question. Let's go to the hardcore reality of the situation, which is we shall conceive a working system to enable private investments in agriculture and agribusiness where today doesn't take place. And why it doesn't take place? For a number of factors that we know, but we have, most importantly, to overcome the barrier. Decent job certification, social compliance, conscious capitalism, education in agriculture, are local markets profitable, young people, holistic approach. That is what we are trying to do with a number of partners. The initiative called Agrify, so the financial initiative for agribusiness and agriculture. Today, you go to a bank in a country in Africa, I bring my example of Uganda, the interest rate was 27%. 27%. You ask money for an investment, they offer to you at 27%, and you have to give back in 12 months. You can't do an investment with that. You cannot. In Europe, we have subsidized agriculture for ages, forever. But the result you can see when you go to Florence and you have a look to those hills with the Chianti, etc., or in Bordeaux, and they ask you, who has painted that? Nobody, the farmers did it. Because farmers are also ecological servants. They are actors in the ecology. So I would really strongly advocate that we help to go to this hardcore reality that our friend was mentioning. So we make such that when there is a businessman, call it farmer, that wants to invest and doesn't have all the capital to do the investment, and the bank is willing to invest but not all the difference, then a public actor, like for example the ACP and the Commission, they intervene with the intra-ACP program and they assist to fill that gap with a subordinated loan, with technical assistance, with the capacity for that business to succeed, and therefore attract that loan from the commercial banks that is important for the validity of the business plan. So this is a scheme. We have studied a similar scheme for rural electrification. The fundamentals of the financial engineering are the same. And the role of the civic society is important because it's a conducive market and a conducive behavior in the local community that make you a successful entrepreneur in your community. So that is a little bit of an answer to your quest. It's a practical one, concrete. We have good plans with the ACP Secretariat, and we try to push them forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just to very quickly thank Mr. Ridolfi, I'd just like to introduce Mr. Roberto Ridolfi, who is the Director for Sustainable Growth and Development at DG Development and Cooperation. So thank you very much for what I thought were very practical remarks, and I'll certainly be taking some of that back. I know that those suggestions that you made there are badly needed. I come from an environment where these are the challenges and these are the reasons why local investors are not investing. If you cannot get reasonable loans with proper tenures, then why would you invest? It's easier for many Nigerian investors to just go and buy an apartment in Dubai than invest in agriculture. And these are some of the issues that we need to fill and challenge and actually provide support for. So I don't know, over to you, Veronica. Maybe we want to bring in...
Yeah, just wanted to ask you, do we still have time for more questions?
Yes, we do. But I just wondered, did you want to make any comment on the... Okay, all right.
Apollo. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Apollo Owor. I come in the private sector environment, and I was quite passionate when private sector gets a bit demonized for making money. I think it's good to make money, and I'm in the private sector, and we definitely make money. And along the guys that we make money with are also the farmers that supply us. So I think the overall perception that it is wrong to make money is wrong, because we are in the business of making money, and it has to be money that is sustainable. So you create wealth, and down the chain, again, wealth is created. So I believe that environment is what is we have to understand, that the private sector as well is the engine of development, because unless we have private sector driving business, then public sector will not have money for taxes, so we have a dead public sector. And then also, in the development arena, we cannot have resources to articulate issues that we want. So it is important to provide this sort of public-private PPPs, okay, public-private partnerships, in order to demystify the overall aspect of transparencies and misunderstandings, and have a harmonized way in which dialogue can happen, so that issues of demonizing one sector and blaming sectors, I don't think makes a lot of sense. Looking at it in the overall environment, what customers want is ethical business, they want environmentally sustainable business, they want food, safe food, which within that overall arrangement is supplied for. So I believe in all the issues of accountability and in issues of stewardship, there's all these practices within the private sector arena. And so my encouragement, especially when I hear Agrify, it's now let's get this Agrify sort of element connected within private sector to create more development. And therefore we are able to attain a greater aspect of creating jobs. And of course, agriculture pays, and it pays really well, because I am a product of agriculture that creates decent jobs and decent livelihood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think Mr.
If it's possible to give an answer, thank you very much. I agree, as businessmen, farmers have to benefit. They must be able to profit from what they are producing, and they have to get access to markets. Otherwise, it's not business. If farmers are reduced to subsistence economy, this is off markets. It's of business, but this is reality in many countries. So we cannot build on farmers that already have access to land and have access to finance. We have to realize that in many, many countries, these preconditions have still to be set by countries. And this is a huge issue. And therefore, we have to address smallholder farmers. This is our focal area of rural development and agricultural policy, because otherwise you would not be able to step up from subsistence economy. And for example, in Ethiopia, we have about 90% of the people being smallholder farmers, 90%. So you can imagine how strong markets are. We have to address this size of farming if we want to really eradicate poverty and fight poverty and eradicate hunger. And therefore, I agree, it must be profitable for farmers, but there are many, many preconditions that can only be set by states, and we have to incentivize the private sector, but not as a third party. We have to empower farmers themselves to get a part of private sector. We have to organize their access to land, their access to finance. For example, cooperatives are an instrument and means to facilitate the opportunities of smallholder farmers to get access to finance by cooperating in this sense, to get access to markets by cooperating. And if we do not succeed to empower smallholder farmers, then the risk is to keep them imprisoned in subsistence economy. And this is not the aim of fighting poverty. The aim of fighting poverty is not to imprison smallholder farmers in the situation they are, so that we can continue to fight poverty. We have to find ways to step up from subsistence economy, and this requires to take into consideration the entire value chain of the agricultural sector, and this includes, as I said before, not only the primary production, it includes also processing. And in this context, I think we really have to think on what to do, because in a country like, as I mentioned, Ethiopia, with 90% of the population being smallholder farmers, this is not really a perspective to improve the situation with 90% of the population staying in the agricultural sector restricted to primary production. So we have to find job alternatives as well. And this has to be stressed much more, I think, in the discussion on rural development. What are the job perspectives for a growing young generation? This has to include processing, especially processing of agricultural goods.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think where the minister finished, maybe I can start from there and say, of course, the diagnosis have been made. I think Roberto said it. We want to get out of we have to, and start doing, and thinking that what we are planning is appropriate. Of course, I think the 2014 report from the FAO report on the world state, the food and agricultural state in the world, stated clearly that we need to transform and to modernize agriculture, working merely on, more especially on the smallholders. And how to do that? I mean, all the assessments telling us that what the main issue is financing. How can you transform agriculture if you do not give them financing, if you do not get electricity to do this and to process the food? I think we are about to agree with the Commission. Not always we agree on everything, but we are about to agree to ban the use of the word commodities. Not because we don't want to see commodities, but to talk less on commodity policies and less on commodity policies and more on agri-products, or we find a new word, policies. Just to clearly indicate that we are putting ourselves in a new position where we are trying to process and to create jobs by processing. That's where the jobs are. When you create, when you try to process, transform, and then you circulate the transport, the commercialization. So that's what we are trying to do. But we have to be careful. We have some instrument, financing instrument, EU ACP. We are not sure that whatever we are putting in place reach the appropriate beneficiary or at the level we want them to be served. Meaning that we should make sure that when we have what I'll call public or free money at 0%, it should not reach the beneficiary at 20 or 30%. It has been said, no country in the world develops its agriculture with only private money. No one. So we cannot ask our countries, ACP countries, which are poor countries, in addition, on top of that, to only go to the market and get the money. Of course, they are private enterprises, private farmers and entrepreneurs. They are ready, they are sustainable projects, they are able to, but the incentives should come from public money. That's what we are trying to do, to put the money where it should be put, and also to train the financing institution. We are thinking maybe of also having some facility where the commercial bank can tap in and assess the project we have been submitted to them, because they don't have the capacity to assess the project. So we have to give them the capacity to mitigate the risk. They are keep seeing agriculture as a risk. We cannot just change their mind, but we have to give them the tools to turn this risk into what we can call opportunities. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just one remark, because the title of this panel is Growing Agriculture, Growing Jobs, the Private Sector on the Spot. So I agree totally with what the colleague from Germany has said. And we are working on that together with the member states, with other partners. But today, the issue was private sector on the spot. What I said before, and the ability today to set up an initiative that can work, Agrify, is today possible because we have cleared the policy area through the communication on the role of the private sector in development, which has been vetted by the Council of the European Union and also by the Parliament. The Parliament is concluding its recommendations. So that policy with principles, social responsibility, environmental responsibility, decent jobs, sustainability, those principles are now able for us to engage with the private sector and enabling us to set up initiatives that can really provide this gap in the financing, but also in the technical assistance to have businesses flourishing without subsidies and therefore without creating debt for young people.
Any comment from the public? Very good. Microphone for the gentleman. Could you introduce yourself and the organization you work?
Yeah, my name is Rob Vos. I work for the FAO. I think we've heard plenty of very good ideas and the direction it should take, maybe also a few bad ideas, but let me not focus on those. Look at the good ideas. I think what I missed in the discussion is the size of the magnitude of the problem we're facing and the sense of urgency. This year there will be 15 million people added to entering the labor market in rural areas in Africa alone, right? Even if in Africa non-agricultural sectors, even if fairly labor intensive, would grow by 10% per year in the coming years, that would only absorb a fraction of those new entrants. So my question is, how can we scale up these good ideas to an extent that we're not running behind the facts and actually scale things up timely so we don't have a lost generation or several lost generations in years to come?
Thank you very much. Who would like to comment?
Thank you. Well, I think one of the ways to bring things to scale is to really think about the invisible backbone of the agricultural sector. I bet there's not one woman farmer in this room. I mean, 1.6 billion women depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. Oh, one. At least we have one, right? clearly there's a slight underrepresentation both on the panel and the audience. And if women had the same investment into them as men, there are lots of figures, obviously, but the figure I have is yields could increase by 30%. We could reduce hunger and poverty by another 15%. Women, no one is investing in women. They are in so many small farms, they're not getting support. Women workers are in all the supply chains. If no women, no tea plucker, no female tea plucker showed up to work one day, the whole industry would ground to a halt. Yet, in the policy making and the policy debates, we hear so little. And in fact, many women are actually right now, by major corporations, pushed off their land, losing access to water. I was in Latin America. I met female farm leaders who told me that some of their friends have been killed. That's what we're actually talking about. Not talking about inclusion or exclusion, we're talking about people being actually killed because they stand in the way of development. Well, development for whom exactly? So yes to the private sector, but the private sector is so large. It's anything from a single-headed household to Monsanto. So what sort of private sector is going to be helpful to bring a living income to all rural communities, but especially women? And Oxfam has challenged the 10 biggest food and beverage companies to make the invisible visible. We went to them and we told them, how many women are working in your supply chains? They had no idea, no clue whatsoever. So, well, that's interesting because many of your consumers are women. So you better find out because otherwise we're going to go out and tell that you don't know. And we have developed a few measures that we're proposing for companies to adopt to make sure that they invest in women, that women are given more resources so they can be more productive and they can help us bring things to scale. 50% of the world population being underutilized, that's scale for me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. My timekeeper says that we have...
Well, we have we can afford one more question from the audience, and just bearing in mind that we're wanting to put the private sector on the spot, we have one more question and a great opportunity to really engage the panelists with a question that really adds to what we're trying to do. So, any one last question before we ask for closing remarks? I don't see any hands. Is anyone shy? I see a hand that's gone up before. Do we give a second chance, or is there? No? Okay, Mr. Green, just one more.
I want to put the issue about small farmers and numerous amount of small farmers. Just I want to put to the panel, the way we have done that in the Caribbean and even Dominican Republic and so forth is the clustering of farmers. And what we have found is that we have done two things. We have classified the small farmers into three categories: the commercial, part-time commercial, subsistence emerging. Because for the purpose of business planning, you have to do that. The second thing we found was that when we cluster farmers together, let's say we cluster 10 farmers with 5 acres, their output together as a unit is 2.5 times that of a person with a single acreage. So there's a lot of advantages and there's a lot of tested things that we have done that could be used as model to scale up, as you mentioned, the cooperative approach. And if we use this approach, you would find that the output and the longevity, the sustainability, the profitability goes up tremendously. So we have a lot of answers. The point is, are we going to act on them, make sure we have the private sector as the engine of growth, not just government? But government must play their role. But farmers as part of the private sector with strategic partnership, like what we have done with other persons who supports in marketing, etc. Have it done properly, you really could create long-lasting wealth that could transform societies.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a very interesting discussion and debate this afternoon. What I'm going to do, because there is some time pressure, is I'm going to ask each of the panelists, starting with Victor, to just give us a few comments and respond to some of the questions that have been raised today before I ask for closing remarks from Mr. Ridolfi. So Victor, if we could just go around the room and start with you.
Bien, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much.
Yo creo que en la República Dominicana nosotros tenemos un gran reto y parte del reto es que nosotros debemos de fortalecer los pequeños productores, incluyendo las pequeñas y medianas empresas, y promover el desarrollo de emprendimiento en el sector agrícola, porque tenemos varios retos, entre ellos el sector es muy informal y esto dificulta que puedan acceder, por ejemplo, a nuevos mercados, a que puedan vender al gobierno, exportar a otro país, o vender, incluso hacer encadenamiento productivo con grandes empresas. Yo igual también pienso que se requiere más acceso a financiamiento para poder hacer otros proyectos en el sector. Pienso que se debe de fortalecer, tal y como hace la Unión Europea y otros organismos internacionales, el personal, el recurso humano a través de capacitación, a través de asistencias técnicas. Y por eso nosotros en República Dominicana creamos 6 centros pymes bajo la metodología Small Business Development Center, y uno de ellos está enfocado al sector agrícola. Si usted, por ejemplo, es un agricultor y necesita una asistencia, nosotros le damos toda la asistencia necesaria para resolver su problema y tenemos un acompañamiento directo dependiendo de los problemas que tenga su negocio. También pienso que se debe fortalecer mucho el tema de la asociatividad en el sector productivo agrícola, porque en mi país se trabaja como por islas. Y ya por último, se debe también de capacitar en todos los temas de gestión del negocio, porque tenemos ciertas debilidades en cómo manejar el recurso humano, el presupuesto y demás. Entonces necesitamos más empresarios gerentes en este caso. Muchas gracias.
Much more
Thank you.
business owners in that section.
Thank you. Maybe one final remark, because we are a few months away from COP21. And one of the elements that Oxfam is really pushing with the private sector at the moment is whether major companies are aware of whether their supply chains are going to be resilient to the effects of climate change. And we are working with them to really think of how do they evaluate the risk and what would be the mitigation measures that they need to take in place to make sure that there will be still farmers to supply their products, because those farmers are able to make a living and send their kids to university, that they will still have workers, and that they will be able to deal with the increasing volatility of the weather and the number of shocks that their supply chains will actually face, so that they can continue their business. And I think what's really interesting is that, you know, if we look 20 years before, many businesses thought, well, these are the nice things to have. And we see more and more businesses saying, well, you know, it's part of our survival. If we don't have a resilient supply chain, we will go out of business. And the day when we have won the battle that taking care of people, taking care of the land, and really thinking about the future is good business, then we'll have a lot of jobs in the rural economies. Thank you.
Okay, so unfortunately, because of time pressures, I'm just going to ask for a very, very few words from each of you. Just a few words, 4 or 5.
The role of the private sector will become more and more important. Of course, you cannot develop a country by taxpayers' money only. You will need the private sector, but not only capital, innovation, initiative, motivation from the private sector. But the state level has to set the preconditions for this engagement, orientation to the people, the political will to act for the public good, to meet the basic needs of the population, to create the necessary infrastructure, not only transport, energy, communication. This has to be done by the public sector. And if I'm allowed to say a last word on how to scale up with agriculture. In the post-2015 agenda, eradicating hunger and fighting poverty will be one of the priority goals. The same applies to the prior goals of the World Bank Group. And this is the political key to address agriculture. And we know there are studies that investments in agriculture and rural development have a more significant impact on development than any investment in other sectors. So this is needed to scale up, and we try to keep it on the top of the political agenda. Thanks.
Very much. Thank you. Very few words, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say that I think I haven't heard any phrase today which I don't agree with. So I think there are many very good ideas. I hope they are being put in practice to make the private sector an even better motor of development. And I really hope I see the private sector it's as a whole of many entrepreneurs. What entrepreneurs do is being flexible and changing and adapting to their environment. I hope that the support which is going to be given to this private sector will recognize that reality and will allow this flexibility to grow and to flourish. Okay.
Yes, just very few. Say, let's listen to the farmers, create market for them. This is our role, create market for them. I mean, help create market for them by financing private sector, connect them to the farmers, and we let the rest go.
Great. I will now just like to call upon Mr. Roberto Ridolfi, the Director for Sustainable Growth and Development, to just give us the closing remarks. Thank you, Mr. Ridolfi.
Thank you. I will do those from here. And I think we are closing with the remarks that we started with. It's not a circle. It's just that we are going to reach the point in which we need to now action. We recognize the role of the private sector in agriculture and agribusiness as fundamental. We don't recognize the role of farming being feeding self. We want farming to be something projecting the human being to be better off, therefore earning living with dignity, so the dignity of the world. Smallholders will have to be assisted in a number of areas through grants, in a number of areas through subsidies, but in the majority of occasions we shall go through the market systems and overcoming the market failures. For example, in providing good access to the good type of finance. This is key. It's not the only factor. We need preconditions. We need enabling environments. We need the rule of law. We need a fair application of the guidelines on land tenure that we support, without which there is no certainty on investments, on the future. We need, in a word, good governance to spread out in the agricultural sector as an economic sector, as the vibrant backbone of the economy of many countries. And for doing that, I will start from what my friend has also said. We shall not talk about commodities. Value addition shall be our mantra. Transformation, socio-economic, which passes through economic added value in agricultural produce. To do that, we need the creativity of men and women. I agree. If things could be given everywhere to women, things will improve. I want to tell you one story on access to land. In northern Uganda, after the internally displaced people, we had the problem of reallocation.
The special address of Dr. Dennis Mukwege, followed by the closing session of this year's European Development Days, will soon start. Kindly take your seats in auditorium A1. Thank you.
I think we heard that.
Yeah.
So I want to conclude with 25 words. One, enabling environment, good governance, the rule of law, justice. Two, promoting private sector, the smallholders to become a little bit better off, a bit stronger, to resist to resilience factors, to resist to disaster, to resist to climate change. Three, the farmers in this way that are looking at the future, they say, I don't want to go to the city, I don't want to migrate, I want to be here. I want to make a very good living for me and my family with this farming. They are empowered to do so. And we have a political framework that now will enable to do this, so we will try to launch this initiative called Agrify with Germany, with the other member states, and of course with the cooperation of our partner countries to fill the gaps in business planning and in good type of patient capital finance to enable private investments in agriculture and agribusiness. I stop here.
Of this year's European Development Days will soon start. Kindly take your seats in room A1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please join me in a great applause for the wonderful panel we have today. Thank you.